Since the last video on the settings, the latency and whatnot, I've got a lot of questions about this. It's a Swedish company actually, so I'm proud to present TEControl. This is the Breathcontroller. This is the way it looks when you get it. So it's just this little plastic thing. Within this, I guess they have some sort of memory, because it also comes with a software that you use to sort of program it. I'll go into that later, but let's go over the basics of this first. It has 4 streams that it can send, 4 MIDI streams. You can control 4 actual CCs at the same time. Guess you would say it has 3 different kind of sensors. A breath sensor, that's a piezo sensor here, so that when you breathe into this, it reacts to how hard you breathe, and you control a curve or a stream with that. You also have a bite sensor, so when you bite down on this, you send another sort of stream. On top of that, you have an accelerometer that sends 2 different streams, one for the nod information, whether your chin is down or up. You also have a tilt stream. You can set up your preferred center point in the software. Once you've set that up, you send all that information to this device, and then it becomes sort of self-contained with regard to all that data. You sort of download it to the memory in this one. And then you can use this on another device or with your iPad or whatever. That's the basics actually. I'm going to go over what you can use it for and different ways that I've used it in all of my videos, how easy it is to get started with and stuff like that. One of the questions that I got was, how long did it take for you to get a good feel for it? That's interesting, because I got this as a present in 2019. My girlfriend got it for me, and I have video from the day I got it. Me being a huge Eric Dolphy fan, I of course started out with a bass clarinet, and my first setup was, as I remember, using CC2 for expression, and I use the bite sensor on CC4, which I assigned to overblowing. I kept this setting even for the next video that was on their alto sax a few days later. Beginning with this, you just plug in the actual USB into the computer, you do your settings, and you decide what those CCs are going to control in the respective instruments, and off you go. We know we have 3 sensors and we have 4 MIDI streams that we can send from this MIDI controller. You could obviously use an expression pedal if you only want to control one MIDI stream and say control expression, and that's the only thing that you want to have. You could also use the aftertouch in the actual MIDI Guitar 2 for any explicit expression demands from any software like the SWAM instruments. With the Breathcontroller, you have these 4 separate streams that you could use if you want to, and I'll give you an example later on where I actually use all 4 for different purposes at the same time, and it's not that construed to use actually, but I'm going to show you some examples here where I use breath part is usually for expression in my case, since I feel kind of connected to the wind instrument way of controlling dynamics. But for everything else, for the bite for instance, I have wind synth instrument in Respiro, where it's very easy actually to assign the different controls to any kind of parameters inside of that synth, and you get really cool results I have this Colin Stetson-ish attempt where I have CC4 controlling timbre and noise. Another really far out experiment I did with this breath controller was to control a lot of parameters at the same time. I have set my breath controller, control my flugelhorn, of course the breath part of it. I have the bite control of the breath controller controlling flam milliseconds for the piano part, which I found really interesting. And I have the nod function of the breath controller here set to move between C and C sharp as bass for my Lydian tonalities. So I have nod controlling the key that the whole piece is in. It goes up by a semitone as I raise it above a certain level that I set myself. So when it's up, it's a semitone higher, and when it's down, it's at the starting point. So here's what that looks like. This is probably the way I most commonly use my breath controller as a controller, separating instruments. I put two instruments in a layer, and I use my breath controller for one coming in only when I blow into the breath controller. I have a Turkish oud sounding all the time, and I have the Armenian duduk coming in when I breathe into the breath controller. Another easy way to get an interesting effect is to use the bite sensor for something that would make sense to control. It's for bow pressure in a cello in this case, and you can probably sense that it's kind of natural to have this biting down on when you would apply more pressure on a bow, right? So there you had a few examples of how you can utilize your breath controller to hook it up to instruments. You can hook it up to your DAW. You could change scenes in Ableton if you want that, and you can do whatever with that, with those actual streams. So it's your imagination is sort of setting the bar or the limit for what you can do with it. I'm gonna let you experiment with whatever you get out of it for now, but I'm going to go on to the next chapter, and that chapter is also related to a question that I got. How am I using my breath controller, say, playing outside? I use some sort of wireless USB Wi-Fi device, or am I magically hiding a very long USB extension? There's no USB extension. I have had 3 or 4 different ways to set up this way of connecting my Breath controller wirelessly to any sort of device. I have connected it to my computer via iPhone in the beginning, via the Bluetooth protocol, and I've connected it via Panda Audio's MIDIBeam, which I think is the most solid version. It's the one with the biggest reach. The latest one that I'm using now is the MIDI Uhost from CME, I think. I'll go over these different solutions, but all of these stem from one complaint that I guess we all had. I mean, when I came into this, the only thing I had that sort of held me back from actually using a Breath controller initially would be the idea of being tied down to the computer by another cord. I've just seen to that I had sort of these for my wireless setup for audio, so that I could always move around freely, and now I set myself up with a Breath controller having to sort of be at arm's length from my computer because of another cord, and that wasn't too attractive, of course. But my first solution to this was actually via this phone solution that I had. I used an old iPhone's USB to Lightning photo adapter. Just plug it into the iPhone and send on a MIDI mirror protocol that was downloadable at that time, at least. I don't know if it's actually possible to use anymore, but it was at that time, and the next logical step for me was to move out and do some recordings outside. And I have an example here from the woods that was dubbed MIDI in the Green at the time, where I sort of bring along my laptop instead. The duration of the recording session is of course limited to the battery time of the laptop, which was about, I think, 20 minutes fully charged from when you started it. So it is what it is. But I brought along this laptop setup. The other one is at the waterfront jetty in front of our house. So a step up from the Bluetooth setup that I had was, of course, when I started using this Panda Audio MIDIBeam stuff. It works great. It really isn't that much of a carry and nothing like that. But it sort of depends on this MIDI DIN 5-pin cable being able to be used, and then I had to have a Conncting MIDI USB host as well. You had this, you had the Conncting USB host, and you of course had to have a power bank to power the Conncting box, and it became kind of clumsy to have all the time for every sort of occasion. So I went on further refining my setup, going on to the CME WIDI Uhost. It's not bigger than this, and I mean, this is the perfect size for anything you want to be carrying along. You can attach it to your guitar strap or whatever. I'm going to have it attached to my guitar strap to this little setup that I had from before, but I'm exchanging my old Wi-Fi equipment for this one instead because of the portability. Or I did a test of the CME stuff in a video where I tested sort of the range that I could use it. How far could I use it inside of my house? And it's like 10 meters, but again, it is what it is. You can use it for that. If I want to use something on stage, I would actually go back to this, since that's far better range and it's more secure, and I get no dropouts and stuff like that. But for my home stuff, the CME works perfectly fine. So one is sort of a bit clumsier. The other one is really slim but doesn't cover nearly as much ground. So as you've realized, I have also the wireless setup for my guitar, a wireless audio setup, of course, going into the audio interface, then being turned into MIDI inside of a computer. So people tend to ask, okay, where do I connect these? Well, most often you don't connect them. Perhaps they connect inside the door. You have these 4 streams of MIDI coming in from the Breath controller, and you have MIDI guitar data coming in, meet up in the instruments themselves. So both of these merge inside of the DAWs most often in my case. But you can also open an instrument inside of MIDI guitar and funnel the Breath controller data inside MIDI guitar if you don't want to open a DAW. We perhaps want to open an instrument inside of MIDI guitar and play it with Breath controller controlling that instrument. Here's how we do. Open MIDI guitar, start with open an instrument. Let's take a Swam clarinet. I'm going to use a preset of my own. I have MIDI guitar presets, and these contain all my own personal settings for the Swam instruments. What I need to do now is to funnel my Breath controller data. So I go into interface here, and here down in the MIDI interface we have something called control. If I click on that, we have no MIDI controller, Scarlett, that's my audio interface, and I have Breath controller, pedal controller, and I have a nano control, which is another controller that I have on the side here. So I want the Breath controller. Since this is a instrument that can bend, I'm going to use bends too. That's the setting I have in the instrument. This is one way. This is controlling an instrument from inside of MIDI guitar. Say that I instead open an instrument outside of MIDI guitar now. Bass clarinet in this case, yeah. So this is now a standalone version of the bass clarinet as well as the standalone version of MIDI guitar too. So they're totally separate, as I have no MIDI controller, no nothing coming into MIDI guitar. The way I would go about it with this kind of setup is, first of all, I must make the Swam instrument ready to receive my MIDI guitar instructions. So I will choose the preset that works with MIDI guitar here as well. But after that, I'll go into Swam settings, the MIDI part, and here you can see that there are a few options. In this case, I want to control the Swam instrument with the Breath controller and with MIDI guitar. So I'll choose those two. Obviously, I can use my Breath controller and MIDI guitar directly into the instrument. can I now use Breathcontroller funneled via MIDI Guitar even when both these are standalone? Unchecking the Breathcontroller here, so I won't have anything in to the SWAM instrument right now. Going back and open the Breathcontroller into MIDI Guitar. So now I'm using my Breathcontroller via my MIDI Guitar, but using all that MIDI into the SWAM instrument. It works perfectly fine. So either way in this setup is perfectly fine. There's one setup left for me to discuss with regard to desktop computer setups, and that's inside of a DAW. If we're working inside of a DAW and we're working with MIDI Guitar as a plugin and we go into interface here, we actually don't have this way of funneling MIDI via the MIDI Guitar plugin per se. So that's not even an option. So the way the DAW is handling the MIDI coming in is different depending on what DAW you're using. But in the Ableton case, you see here in the MIDI from part, you have the different alternatives, just like I had in the SWAM instrument, for instance. Here's where the merger of the MIDI happens in this kind of setup. And of course, I need to say something about how I set up with an iPad if I'm going to do something. Okay, so what about the software that comes with the Breathcontroller, the graphical interface? I'm going to do a sort of little experiment here for us to acquaint ourselves with the software part of this. We have 4 curves in different colors, and they all represent one of these streams that I've been talking about. So we have breath is red, we have bite is green, nod is purple, and we have tilt that is light blue. Those 2 curves that are associated with the accelerometer have different properties. The starting position would be somewhere in the middle. You tend to want to center those in a neutral position, somewhere like there. But these are going to move as you move along all the time. Whereas the red and the green one, those are the ones that you apply pressure to and get sort of a greater possibility to control a curve with, from close to open to close again. I can start with the breath, and you will be looking in the corner here for the marker that belongs to the red curve here. And I can, with pretty high degree of precision, place that marker somewhere along this curve. Like that. And I can do the same with the bite. If we sort of distinguish that curve a bit. So you see with the nod, on the other hand, you have that here somewhere, and you can see as I raise and lower the controller, you can see that it follows function and the tilt function as well. Perhaps not those most precise things, but you have a lot of sliders that you can use to alter the shape of the curve and hence also the controlling properties. This is called bending, and you have something called symmetry, and you have a sensor, a minimum sensor, and you have a max sensor. You also have something called an attack filter and a decay filter. I won't go over every property these have here. but you can see that you can change the curves appearance wildly. You have these sliders for all of these curves separately, of course. Let me set the scene for this little experiment. I'm going to use a tenor sax, a reverb, and the 4 streams from the Breathcontroller to control different properties in this very little set. I'm going to have a breath control the expression of a swam tenor sax. I'm going to have bite controlling the overblow effect, and I'm going to have nod control the size of the room I'm playing in. The higher up, the bigger the room. It sort of opens up the room. And I'm going to have tilt control the panning effect of that. Breath is MIDI channel 1, MIDI CC2 control change, of course. Bite, MIDI channel 1, MIDI CC4. When it comes to nod, it's enough for me to know that I use MIDI CC12 here and tilt MIDI CC13. That will appear as a number when I use the MIDI learn function in Ableton later. So now I have my MIDI guitar here, I have the tenor sax, and I have the reverb. First thing, as always, choose the preset. I'm using the MIDIguitar 2 preset here with the breath control set on CC2. If we go into mappings here, we can see that I have expression is set to CC2, and this is internally to the SWAM instrument. So here's where I make the settings that would match the settings that I have on the incoming sort of software. Also, I'm perhaps interested in stuff like overblowing here, and I have that set to MIDI CC4, as you can see here already. Once I arm this track like this, it will pick up on anything I play right now. So if I bite down on this, you'll see that the overblow square here turns yellow. That means that it's connected correctly to that function. You can also look at the expression meter here moving as I breathe into this. That means that I have expression connected on CC2 and I have overblow connected on CC4. What I want to do with this reverb is to control the room size with that. So this is the meter I'm gonna try to control with that kind of movement. The easiest way for me to assign this movement to that particular action is actually to put Ableton in a MIDI learn mode. The thing that comes up here, it says 112, and that's MIDI channel 1 and it's CC12. So I know it's connected to the right parameter in this case. That seems to work fine, right? Now I want to assign this tilting of my head movement to the panning motions. If we have this in MIDI learn, as I think it is, it should be, yeah, it says 113 here, and it's on the track panning. So the panner reacts to my tilting motion of this. So this is what I had in mind. My head movement in this direction will make the room bigger and smaller, and I'll have the panning connected to this movement. I'll have overblow connected to biting down on the breath controller, and I have the breath, of course, connected to the expression aspect of the tenor sax. if you were to try that at once, you would surely get some sort of neck injuries. Don't attempt to do these 4-stream experiments at once. Go slow, add perhaps 1 stream at a time. But what I wanted to show perhaps with these accelerometer streams are that they're actually very effective in adding small movements perhaps to the bigger picture. It's not a bad idea to sort of use them for panning effects or for dry-wet relations in reverbs like here, just to get some subtle effects into the bigger picture. But again, this is up to you to experiment with and do your best to get the most out of this. And I'm sure you're gonna have a blast using a breath controller. I mean, for me, the breath controller is the best complement to the MIDI guitar setup. The amount of expression that you can get out of any software using a breath controller is really amazing. And then consider the fact that you have 4 streams to work with rather than perhaps only 1 that most people do associate the breath controller with. So again, if you made it all the way here, thank you. And I guess I'll see you in another video on another subject soon enough. Bye.